Hi, Getty from GettyStewart.com here with tips and information on making the best ever breakfast casseroles. These casseroles are fantastic for when you have people coming over and you want to spend time with them and not in the kitchen. They are truly make ahead. You can make them the evening before, or you can make them weeks or even months in advance, and I'm going to share those tips with you today as to how to freeze the raw ingredients or how to freeze and prepare the finished product. So let's hop right in and start by just combining our ingredients and talking about the different ingredients. I'm going to start talking about the meat that you use in these stratas or breakfast casseroles. Often it's a combination of bread and eggs and milk, meat and vegetables, as well as cheese. Now, all of those you can substitute and change up. You can add or omit as you like. In my version, I'm using pork sausage, which I have pre-cooked and browned on the stove, along with some onions to give the onions a milder flavor and texture. After browning or cooking your meat, you want to let that cool a little bit so that the hot meat isn't cooking your eggs right away. So we're going to set that aside and cool. Now, in terms of meat, you can use any kind of pre-cooked meat, so sausage, ham, bacon, leftover turkey or chicken, you name it, you can toss it into one of these breakfast casseroles. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the eggs and milk. And typically what you'll find in these recipes is that you have the same ratio of eggs to milk. So if I'm using 2.5 cups of milk, it's about 8 to 10 eggs. And in volume, that's roughly the same, give or take a quarter to a half cup. So we are going to combine those. Now I'm using 1% milk, but you could use full fat milk or skim milk, or you could even use cream. The richer, the more fat in your milk, the thicker the custard will be. Same if you use more eggs than milk, you're going to have a thicker custard, a more egg-like dish. If you use skim milk, you're going to have a lighter texture to your final egg breakfast or egg breakfast casserole. So whatever preference, they're all correct, just slightly different. So what we're going to do is we're going to mix our eggs, just sort of beat them up a little bit and break all those yolks. I'm going to put them in the large bowl, and in this case we are putting everything in a large bowl. You could also layer things directly in the pan, but because I'm going to freeze the raw ingredients, I'm going to mix them all in a very large bowl. So get your large bowl out. There. Eggs are mixed. We're going to add our milk, and again, about equal amounts of eggs and milk. If you're looking for a recipe, GettyStewart.com has a fantastic breakfast, make-ahead breakfast casserole, and that's the one that I'm making now. So you can look there, but there's tons of recipes that you can use and follow basically the same thing. Now, the next thing that we want to add is some herbs. Now, I like adding a little bit more flavor and not just relying on the sausage. So some of the herbs that go really well in an egg dish like this is thyme or sage or rosemary. So some of the more aromatic herbs. You could also do sort of more of an Italian bent. You could use a little basil and oregano, maybe with a little garlic powder. Totally up to you again. So I am using some thyme. I've added a little bit of mustard powder and cayenne pepper to amp up the oomph factor in this. Black pepper, salt, and a little bit of nutmeg, because I just think nutmeg and eggs, and especially because we're using spinach, fantastic. Definitely something to consider. I've also added a little bit of salt in here. Now my sausage will add, and cheese will also add salt, so I haven't gone too crazy with that. So we've added in our spices. The next thing we are going to add, I'm just consulting with my my recipe over here, is our bread. Now, here's where you can use just about whatever kind of bread you have available to you. So you have an old bagel that nobody's going to eat, or got a little bit of freezer burnt, you go right ahead and you add it to your dish. we're making cubes that are about 1/2 inch to 1 inch big. You notice I'm not measuring, it doesn't really matter that much. You've got some extra sourdough, go ahead and toss that in. Now you'll see some recipes say cut off the crust. Well, what's a little crust between friends? So as long as it's not super hard, go ahead and include that. If you really want to not have anything a little, even slightly chewy, you can just go ahead and remove the crust. If you have only fresh bread, because this really works, and you can hear some of my bread is really hard and crunchy. There's some croutons that you can use. You can use old croissants, old hamburger buns, whatever you have available. But you do need it to be old stale bread, because the idea is that this will soak up all the liquid. And if you just have fresh bread, it's too humid already. It won't absorb as much of the liquid. So that could be one potential danger of having a strata or a breakfast casserole that's too liquidy. So if you only have fresh bread available in your house, then go ahead and dry it out. Simply put it on a baking sheet and put it in the oven at 250 degrees for 30 minutes, and your bread will get crunchy and dry out a little bit, and it'll be perfect for this kind of casserole. So this was fancy marble party bread, and we had leftovers, and so it's going in the pot. You see, I've used all kinds of different bread in here. It's all good. And I'm gonna add it to the pot. Now, I also want to add some extra add-ins, and so I am going to add some sweet peppers, great for color and flavor. They cook up very nicely. You don't need to pre-cook them at all. So we're gonna add that in. I'm also going to add some spinach, and what I've used is frozen spinach, these frozen spinach pucks, and I've thawed them in the microwave and then really squeezed out as much liquid as I can. So you can see my spinach is quite dry, and that's because we don't want to introduce extra liquid, particularly water or watery liquid, to our mix. So make sure that you really squeeze out and drain that spinach very well. And then I'm going to add that spinach into my my mix here. And just break that up a little bit. There we go. Now, you can use, instead of spinach, if you want those dark leafy greens, which I really do enjoy in a strata like this, you could also use Swiss chard, beet greens, collard greens, kale, they all work. If you just have fresh, just wilt that down a little bit and cook it up so that it gets incorporated, nicely chopped, well drained. And you can see things are looking good already. Now, time for cheese. Now, add cheese based on what you love best, and this is another place where you can add flavor. So we like adding some old cheddar, a little bit more flavorful than the milder ones. Anything, and think about texture. You want some nice melty cheese, maybe some Swiss or Gruyere. You want some more flavor, maybe a jalapeno, Monterey Jack, that kind of idea. I'm also adding some crumbled feta, again, just a slightly different flavor and texture to our mix. And now, normally, if I were putting this in a pan, I would sprinkle the Parmesan on top after I had laid it all out. But because I'm freezing the raw ingredients ahead, I'm going to add the Parmesan in here as well. The alternative is that the morning that I'm making this, I could grate my Parmesan and add it on top of that. But I truly, you know, I don't want to bring out the grater. I don't want to get into that kind of work the morning of. So I'm going to just incorporate it and trust that it's just going to look all nice and lovely anyway. So there we go. Let us add our meat to all of this. And as you can see, you could totally go meatless on that, because that was already a lot of good things going on in there. So this is just the final add in. Now, if you are going meatless, think about possibly adding a little bit more flavor. I'd probably up the salt a little bit, and then think about increasing some of those herbs, because right now I'm relying on the sausage flavor to add some flavor to this dish overall. So there you have it, my mixed up ingredients. If I were baking this tomorrow morning or in a couple of hours, so you do need to let this soak for at minimum 2 hours. Remember that bread that was all dry and stale? Well, it needs to soak up and plump up all of that liquid that we've included in here. So now that we have it all mixed up, it's time to put it in our pan. Now, if you're going to put it in the pan, make sure you grease your pan very well. So you could use oil or you could use butter to grease your pan, and then dump it in, cover it up with foil or saran wrap, and leave it in the fridge overnight. That's ideal. The next morning, you're gonna pull it out, leave it on the counter while your oven's preheating to 350 degrees, and then pop it in the oven for about an hour. So do give yourself a little bit of time in the morning. You don't have to do anything else, but you do need to let it cook that full time. So how do you know your casserole is done? Well, you're going to have a look and check the edges, and if your edges are starting to get nice and brown, then you know you're getting on your way. You're also going to check and jiggle it a little bit. So you're just going to slide it, and you're gonna watch the center. If it's still jiggly, it's not done. Your eggs still need to cook a little bit. You're also going to take a knife and poke it into the center. If it comes out clean, there's no liquid stuck to it, you're good to go. If you find that it's browning too much, or that it's still jiggly but the edges are too brown, cover it with foil and let it continue to bake. When you take it out of the oven, you want to make sure that it rests for at least 5 to 10 minutes, and that's going to set the whole dish and really prevent anything from spilling over, and you'll get nice solid chunks of breakfast casserole. And you'll see here, these pieces are pretty solid. So yeah, there shouldn't be runny bits when you pull your casserole out. And then you let it, if you're going to freeze ahead, so then you can serve right away, or if you want to freeze it and you want to freeze the finished baked product, let it cool completely on the counter, put it in the fridge for a couple of hours. You want it to be absolutely cold, because you do not want any condensation in the bag when you freeze it. So you're going to take your whole tray and you're going to put it in a freezer bag. So you could do this, or you could saran wrap, foil, and then put it in your freezer or a freezer bag. Or alternatively, you could take this, if let's say you need your container, you could take this out of the pan, the whole breakfast casserole, and put it in a Tupperware container, freezer container, or the freezer bag. If you want to have single serve, then you could also pack the individual pieces. So lots of options here in terms of how you freeze the finished product, in the pan individually, or out of the pan, the whole kit. To reheat it, you will take it out of the freezer, let it thaw for at least 24 hours. It's going to take a while. And then pop it in the oven at 325, 350 for about 20 minutes. Basically, you just need to heat it through. I do recommend covering it at this point, because you've already browned it, so you don't want it to get any crispier up top. So cover it and bake it. So that's after you've baked the full dish. Now what I want to also show you is that you can take these, this raw ingredient, this raw mixture, and you can place it in freezer bags just like this, just like this. You could freeze it in the baking dish, but let's say you want to use the baking dish for other things. So if you don't want to use your baking dish, go ahead and grab a freezer bag. Make sure that you write the instructions for reheating it on the bag, and then go ahead and load up your bag. Now, this is a pretty big dish, so we may need 2 bags to load this up. We'll see how that goes. So basically, this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna fill my bag. I'm going to layer it, flatten it out like this, seal it up nice and tight, remove as much air as I possibly can, seal that real tight. I've got the instructions written here for how to thaw and bake this once it's out of the freezer. But here's another little tip. When I freeze it, I place it on a tray like this so it freezes sort of flat and will be easier to thaw once I have it. When I take it, so after it's frozen, I take the tray out of the freezer and have this bag in my freezer. When I'm ready to use it, I will place the whole bag in the fridge and let it thaw for 24 hours. Once it's thawed, I pour it in my baking dish and continue to bake it as it is. Now, how long can you store it? So the finished baked product, you can keep this in the fridge once it's baked for 3 days. And then I recommend freeze the rest, or just chow down and really go to town and have some great leftovers. So 3 days in the fridge once it's baked. You can freeze the whole thing and keep it in the freezer for up to 3 months. I wouldn't go much longer than that. You can freeze these raw ingredients, whether it's in the pan or in a bag like this, for 2 to 3 months. I wouldn't go much beyond 3 months because the ingredients will start to deteriorate. It'll be perfectly safe, but the quality will start to deteriorate. So go ahead and use it within 2 to 3 months and you're good to go. I hope that's been a helpful look at breakfast casseroles. Lots of information here. If you need more, I'm at gettystewart.com. There's articles on this information. There's a great recipe for you to try that looks exactly like this. And if you like what you see, please subscribe and hit the like button, and we'll see you next time.